Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you. I'm Mark Chupp, co-director of the Social Justice Institute, along with my colleague Aisha Bell Hardaway. We welcome you tonight and are excited to have you here. Just to get things moving, you can read our director's statement in the program and hear more from us that way. But we're going to also just acknowledge and recognize with gratitude for the earth and recognize the land upon which we reside, and express our gratitude and appreciation for those who lived and worked here before us. And the entire land acknowledgement is also in your program, and we encourage you to look at it and use it as both a moment to educate ourselves about our land and the ancestral history here, and also to take action to make right or begin to do that process of healing from that harm that occurred. So we have a full program tonight, and tomorrow you're going to hear more about that in a little bit. But I'm excited that we listened to you and we planned this out, and is really the dream child of Aisha, and we really want this to be a healing space for you. And so the way we've created this space here and the program itself with lots of arts and music and theater is really to create that balm for what ails us. As part of that process, we created a community care room. So it's right outside, when you go outside the door, go to the right, and at the top of the stairs, you'll see a sign that says Social Justice Institute Community Care Room. You'll find in there, there's a lot of things to help you in terms of this process, and I'll say a little bit about that. The intention of that is to create a safe space for rest and renewal. And how do we detach from the white supremacist capitalist systems that result in activists too often working themselves literally to death? Tricia Hersey, who you might know, founder of the NAP Ministry, recently published a book, Rest is Resistance, a manifesto. Known as the NAP Bishop, Tricia Hersey says, if you're not resting, you'll not make it. I need you to make it. And she challenges the dominant assumption that it's laudable to show up even when we're sick, exhausted, and overstressed. So in light of that, we want to provide our caring space for you. Because many social justice activists like you have to work at their important causes outside of the workday and their family obligations. And we must resist the demands and expectations of the grind culture that just pushes and pushes and pushes. And so the call is literally to take naps and so much more. It's about slowing down, even if just for a few moments, to recognize what the systems are doing to us and reimagine justice work and our role in it. Resting is resistance. So Bishop Hersey's 4 tenets of the NAP Ministry are, number 1, rest is a form of resistance because it disrupts and pushes back against capitalism and white supremacy. Number 2, our bodies are a site of liberation. Number 3, naps provide a portal to imagine, invent, and heal. And number 4, our dream space has been stolen and we want it back, and we'll reclaim it via rest. So inspired by NAP Bishop Hersey and the Mandel Center on Trauma and Adversity, we've created this room. And so there's beanbag chairs in there, there's art material in there, there's active things that you can do, or you can just go and take a nap in there. And so we want you to have that space available. If you're feeling tired, feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed by what's coming to you, just go and take a break anytime. And we'll have some spaces tomorrow in this room for that as well. So in that spirit, I would just like you to take a minute and breathe. And so let's just come and get centered for the great evening we have before us. So I'm just going to invite you to slow down, take a deep breath in, deep breath out. Another deep breath in. Deep breath out. Know that you're welcomed here. We love you and care for you. Let us know what else we can do to help support you in your in your efforts for liberation and the process of becoming. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Aisha.
We are grateful for those of you who were here last night and decided to join us again. I see many familiar faces. We're starting out tonight with some art. I said last night, I'll say it again for those who weren't here. Robin D.G. Kelley has in his book Freedom Dreams a pretty strong statement about the importance of art as we think about liberation, as we plan and imagine a future free of oppression and marginalization, that the work of liberation is not possible without the arts. And so with that in mind, tonight and tomorrow, we have arts and different gifts woven throughout the entire program. We have with us tonight Raja Bell Freeman. Let me try that again. I have to take my glasses off to read. It's a weird phenomenon. Get close to 50, you'll understand. Raja Bell Freeman is a performance poet and visual artist. She started to take writing seriously as a student at 12 Literary Arts. She grew to become a teaching artist at 12 until she came to the Lake Erie Inc. Currently, Raja is the youngest member to ever serve on the board of directors for South Euclid's Community Development Corporation, One South Euclid. She is also the daughter of a dear childhood friend of mine. She gets her gifts and her talents, honestly, it's in the blood. I've known her father, Mom, that's Rob Freeman's daughter. I've known her father since I was in the 4th grade. And so she is blessed, and we are blessed to have her with us. You want to come forward, Raja? Thank you. Please give Raja a warm welcome.
Hi. So when I saw the theme, A Balm for What Ails Us, I wasn't going to share the first few poems that I'm about to share. But when I saw the theme, I thought it was fitting, right? So these first poems that I'm going to share, I wrote when I was in college. I graduated from Cleveland State in 2020. And I don't know if you guys remember 2020. Yeah, but there were some things that weren't exactly ideal, right? And I had a degree in creative writing, which meant I had to do a lot of writing, obviously. And, we went on spring break, and then we just didn't go back ever. We just never went back to the campus again. But we still had these poems due every week, and I was like, I don't want to do this, right? So every week I would hand in a poem, and it would be called crisis writing, and it would just be these really stupid thoughts. I'd be like, crisis writing, number 3, here. And my professor was like, cool, you did the assignment. That's all I really can ask of you right now, right? But then things started to get more serious, and then we had all of these protests and all of these other things going on and all this other, and everything was just a crazy time in 2020. And I realized we were having more than one crisis, right? So I think this first poem is the poem that I wrote right after I realized that we had more than one crisis, and that this was something that intersected with a lot of different worlds. You know what I mean? Yeah. Thank you for talking about. I've been teaching all day, and the students, I'll be like, do you know what I mean? And they'll be like, no, or they want. Right, or they won't say anything, and it's pay attention, please. All right, so this is crisis writing number 8. The last time I was as scared as this, I was miles from home in a hotel in the South, and a headline told me that a man had been lynched in a park a block away. And a white girl said to me, but this is kind of cool, we're really living through history right now. So when the pandemic started, I thought of her, because I think I know now what she was feeling. An awful thing was affecting her, but probably wouldn't kill her. I wish I could have felt it in that hotel. The feeling of knowing that I would get to live through history, of knowing that the worst of things had already passed, even if it was ignorant. In fact, I wish I could feel it now. Our hotel was on lockdown, just like the country is now. Here I am again in disaster. Heart beating through history because I keep telling it to. Knowing I'll live through the virus, but this time is different. This is a hydra of a crisis. America's been growing ugly crisis head after ugly crisis head for as long as she's been. But we've had her in quarantine so long we forgot red blood, white skin, and blue uniform are her 3 favorite Crayola crayons. It seems with every mass scattered on I-90, 2 black bodies drop on camera. How many national pandemics can America fit in her pocket? How many can she swallow like candy? How many can she dismiss at a time? And how many will make the news today? Crisis writing number 24. Oh, thank you. Crisis writing number 24. Patrick Warren is shot and killed outside his home after yet another wellness check gone wrong. Everything I've seen since I saw the video of his last moments alive has existed through a lens of his murder. In other words, I don't understand how we keep living as if this never happened, and I fail to understand it every time. My dreams are clips of reality in montage. Get down, says the officer. Rise up, says Amanda Gorman 6 days later. Be the light, says Gorman. Lighten the skin, says America, since America has said much of anything at all. Children are the future, says the world. You're acting like a child, says yet another officer. I am a child, says 9-year-old girl, handcuffed and pepper sprayed. How could catastrophe possibly prevail over us, asked Gorman. By blunt force and power, says I. Paying attention. Pay attention. I'm not here to give you hope. I'm here to tell you what to hope for. Crisis writing number 27. This next one's called I Love Black People. Do you know how people say they love candles, but they really mean they love the way candles smell when they're burning? Find some sick, excited peace in watching the body of the candle droop down under the weight of itself. You love candles. When they burn, their scents are so strong, their light is so illuminating. Watching the flame flick over the wick is so exciting. There's nothing better than the way the flame beats at the candle, right? Leaves no choice but to soften, liquefy, bend over, surrender. You love candles. You could breathe in the smoke of their burning bodies all day. You love candles. In fact, I've seen you weeping over a candle burning out for the last time. A puddle, a burning nub of a wick. So sad to see a candle gone, but not sad enough to reach down and try to snuff out the flame, because that flame was what made it so beautiful in the first place, right? You love candles, so you buy another, and you light another, and another, and you consume, and consume, and consume, and we burn, and we melt, and we burn, and we melt, and we burn, and we melt, and repeat. Oh, thank you guys are such a great audience. This next poem is called Water Cycle. Hold on. This thing. Okay, there was like a keyboard thingy and it kept like moving and I had to push it in. Okay, I didn't know that was on here until, okay. Water cycles. History repeats itself like water. Water repeats itself like history. We learn in school that water holds on to a distant past, that we're drinking the same water from decades or even centuries ago. Meaning, the water raining down on us today is the same water that left all those people without a place to go after Katrina. The same water in the rivers the Underground Railroad followed to freedom. The same water in the rivers the Negro speaks of. The same water we wash our curls in. The same water we wade in, that God troubled. The same water left rusted and indigestible in Flint's pipes. The same water they found Emmett Till in. The water in the hoses they sprayed us with is the same water that caught us when we jumped ship and held us tight until nothing hurt anymore, and buried us where no one could find us again. This dirty water, this muddy water, this bloody water, guilty water, filthy water. Water repeats itself like history. History repeats itself like water. We learn in school that history holds on to a distant past, that we're living the same history from decades or even centuries ago, meaning the history coming down on us today is the same history that left all those people without a place to go after Katrina. The same history in the rivers the Underground Railroad followed to freedom. The same history in the rivers the Negro speaks of. The same history we wash our curls in. The same history we wade in, that God troubled. The same history left rusted and indigestible in Flint's pipes. The same history they found Emmett Till in. The history in the hoses they sprayed us with is the same history that caught us when we jumped ship and held us tight until nothing hurt anymore, and buried us where no one could find us again. This dirty history, this muddy history, this bloody history, guilty history, filthy history. History repeats itself like water, and water repeats itself like history. Does anyone know how long I've been standing up here? Because I don't want to use up too much time, but I think I'm doing good, right? Do you think I'm good? Okay. All right, so like before I do my next poem, I want to talk about myself a little bit, because like poets, we just get up here and then we just start talking, and then you don't know anything about me. I mean, there was a whole bio about me that was read, but like, who am I really? You know what I mean? I teach poetry. I draw with pen. You ever draw with a pen? You can't erase. You know how hard that is? When I draw with a pen, I use little dots, right? And it takes forever. It's called stippling. You just over and over again until you have like a big picture, and it takes forever. It's one of my favorite ways to draw, though. I post really funny things on Facebook. Send me a friend request. I'm a Libra. My birthday was earlier this month, so I just turned 24. Yeah. Oh, thank you. It feels weird to me, though, because I feel like 24 is like old. No. No way, hear me out, because like, listen, that's over 2 decades. You know what I mean? See, but that's the thing. That's the thing, though. I feel like I can't be 24 yet because I'm entirely too young. Like, I feel like there's a checklist of things you're supposed to do before 24, and based off of that list, I'm probably like 17, or like maybe I'm 16. But that's probably why I have never, ever, not once in the history of everything ever, lost a game of Never Have I Ever. Like, I always win easy. Like, a friend could say, never have I ever been drunk. And while most of the circle surrenders one of their fingers, overlapping it with other fingers laid down in defeat in rounds prior, I, with 10 fingers standing strong, laugh. Because I'm gonna win, and I know it, and I'm a sore winner. So I look at the circle, proud, And I say, never have I ever seen a pork chop. And the looks I get after that are usually just sad, but that's okay because I win. The only game I can win for having such a clean slate, which is perfect because I never, ever have to worry about dirtying it up as long as I have this game. It's better this way, see, because if anything should happen to me, there'll be nothing to slander my name with, nothing to dig out the dirt, no dirt to dig into in the first place. I stay in line. I keep my head down. I keep my mouth shut, because I know how far they'll go to stretch a story wide enough to cover themselves, to repurpose slight character flaws for a guilt-free narrative. Should I be gunned down tomorrow, may the news headlines paint me beautiful, paint me truth, paint me in full color, not just in black, paint me human. May my shooter be villain in my narrative, not hero in their own. May the sound of their name be irrefutably disturbing. Should I be gunned down tomorrow, may you remember my words and know that I did not deserve to die. Know that I lived each waking moment so deep in fear of bullets that I forgot how to sin. And as you hear my words in this moment, remind yourself that the price for not following orders should never be death. Remind yourself that the price for one small mistake should never, ever be death. Remind yourself that a child, yes, I said a child, that makes one mistake does not deserve to be shot and shot and shot and shot and shot and shot. Know that his mother, like every mother, did not deserve to see her son's lifeless corpse decaying in the middle of the street. He, like you and I, was human and therefore made mistakes. He was 18, but I would trade him my chance to turn 24 if I could. Should I be gunned down tomorrow, know that I, like anyone else would be, was scared. When they dig up my mistakes that I'm too afraid to admit I have made, remember this poem. Remember I stayed in line the best I could, kept my head down, my mouth shut. Know that I have never, ever lost a game of never have I ever. 10 fingers always pointed to the sky. Crisis writing number 19. There have been a lot of different theories on how the world is going to end because of some man-made catastrophe, like nukes or climate change or coronavirus, but personally, I don't like the sound of those. I think they're all just a little too cliche. I think if I had to write the end of the world, I'd have a curious black child running their thumb across the horizon until they found the edge of a smooth strip of tape. And they'd start scraping at it with their nail until it peeled away. And there'd be nothing holding the sky to the earth anymore. And the world would just peel back like the top of a convertible. No flames, no sickness, nothing nefarious, just a collapse. Thank you.
That is so powerful. Raja, what a gift. Thank you for sharing your talents with us tonight. Your words paint a picture that is so vivid. I'm so grateful that you would bless us with your gifts. So again, I'm also very grateful for those of you who were with us last night, those of you who's decided to come out tonight. If you weren't with us last night, you missed a treat. Our conversation between Derica Purnell, the author of Becoming Abolitionist, and our second-year undergrad student, Kamaria Valentine, was, and I know y'all probably gonna think I'm exaggerating, but it's true. Y'all can watch it probably on YouTube later and you'll know I'm right, was one for the history books. It was authentic, it was accessible, it was deeply thought-provoking, all at the same time. She has a humble, insightful way of making her point clear, and also connecting the echoes throughout history to the present day. Many of you may have heard me and amening from the front row. It was that good to me. And it left me eagerly anticipating the nuggets and the gems that we will have with us tonight. Our panel, as you saw earlier, is supposed to be a 4-person show, and now we have a 2-person show because coronavirus is still very real, y'all. Nevertheless, I know we are still in for a treat. The panel discussion is titled Liberation Through Democracy, and it likely should have a question mark at the end of it. Our panelists are actively involved in today's current efforts to protect our nation's system of democracy. And it's a system that purportedly values every individual's right to vote on issues and to select elected representatives in a manner that allows the will of the people to set the direction of our local, state, and federal governments. But too often it's unclear of who's leading whom. Is our government truly run by the people for the people? Or do the critiques, I love y'all, or do the critiques of the representative democracy being elitist, or maybe even a form of abdication of our authority, have some merit? And in what ways have those in power succeeded in marginalizing and silencing entire groups, entire issues, and the like? Today, this very day, I was driving around doing the things that I do, and I noted that the media is framing the threat around, or framing the discussion of the threat to democracy as being driven by conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. They're drawing a straight line from the lies about the validity of the election results to the violent attack on January 6th, and then yesterday's home invasion and attack that left Nancy Pelosi's husband hospitalized with injuries. I'm baffled by the media's refusal, and those of others, to recognize that violence has always been used to attack, maim, and even kill those who were deemed a threat to the American system of racial hierarchy. The debates on slavery saw Thaddeus Stevens threatened by a colleague with a knife on the legislative floor, and Charles Sumner attacked in the Senate chamber by a pro-slavery colleague with a cane. During Reconstruction, white mobs of former Confederates violently beat, raped, and murdered Black people in Memphis, Colfax, New Orleans, and many other cities that our history books don't even tell us about, all in the name of denying the right to vote. Yes, efforts to deny Black and brown people the right have taken various forms over the years: gerrymandering, restrictive voting rights, voting laws. But one constant remains, and that's the use of violence to intimidate and take the life of those bold enough to try to exercise their rights. And I know some will say that we've made some strides. After all, there are Black people serving in Congress, and we have 3 whole current senators that identify as Black. We're also sitting in a city where our current mayor is Black, and he follows 3 others, Black mayors who have served our city over the course of history. So, what do we want, and why do we want anything more? I'm really, really grateful that our panelists have decided to join us in this conversation of liberation through democracy, ? Erica L. Anthony is co-founder and executive director of Votes. It is Cleveland Votes, okay. Erica L. Anthony is co-founder and executive director of Cleveland Votes, a nonpartisan democracy-building movement that works to reconstruct and strengthen power through active participation of collective partners. They promote and form action-oriented mobilization that shifts power towards equitable civic engagement and infrastructure. Anthony also sits on a number of boards, including City of Cleveland's Planning Commission, Cuyahoga County Public Defender Commission, Midtown Cleveland, Inc., in NOACA's Community Advisory Board, Ohio Voice, and Red, Wine, and Blue. I know better. I know Katie, so I apologize for that. And Red, Wine, and Blue. We also have with us tonight Lawrence Caswell. Lawrence is the managing editor of Community for Signal Cleveland, a new community-focused nonprofit newsroom in Cleveland. Caswell has worked in non-commercial community media for over 27 years, including 11 years at IdeaStream Public Media. A lifelong Northeast Ohioan, shout out to those of us who just won't leave home. Caswell is focused on equipping Cleveland residents with civic tools and information to better participate in local government and building community around the exchange of civic knowledge. Will you please join me on the stage here, Erica and Lawrence? So our format tonight is going to be loose and organic. I want each of you, Erica, you can go first, Lawrence, you can follow, to describe for our community here your work, and then you guys can, and then Lawrence, of course, you'll do the same. Please be in conversation as you see fit. I put the waters down there so that our photographer is not impeded in any way. And then we'll take questions from the audience, much like we did last night. Mark is gonna make sure that the microphones are set up. We'll have one on each side of the room. As we did last night, we're gonna go back and forth. If you're a community member, please state your question or your comment, but do so succinctly. If you're a student, do the same thing. And I don't see too many students because it's Friday night on a college campus. And it's a masquerade ball I saw as I walked into the building. The concrete chalk told me it's a masquerade ball tonight. But to the extent, we just want to make sure that there's a balance of both community questions and student questions if there are any. And if we get stuck, I'll be prepared to ask some questions as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Hardaway, Dr. Chupp, Case Western Reserve Social Justice Institute for making this space available for us this evening. Having what I'm going to say are safe spaces to have dialogue is really important these days. I want to give a nod to Dr. Chupp and the team for creating the healing space. This is something that is really heartwarming for me. My team, and I have a teammate here, Brianna, joining me. We just came back from a staff retreat, and we talked about creating a healing station in our office. So it's something that post-election, because we're a little busy right now, we hope to do. And we actually just purchased the NAP ministry for each of our team members, so we can read that together and really hold ourselves accountable to what that means. It's one thing to say rest is in the resistance, but how do our practices embody that personally as well as organizationally? So just want to thank you all for that. I also want to acknowledge Raja, just a beautiful gift that you brought to us this evening. Thank you. Thank you for the spirit of just determination. As I was listening to you, I was reflecting in real time, thinking about topic of discussion tonight and liberation, through democracy, ? As Dr. Hardaway has opened us to think about this. And I started to think about the work of myself over the years, as well as the work of Cleveland Votes. And joy is a word that I try to embody. And you have such a joyful spirit. Thank you for bringing that this evening. This is not an easy topic, and it is hard some days to acknowledge and find joy in democracy or joy in the resistance because of so many of the atrocities that we are witnessing, what feels like by the minute. It's not even by the day, it's not even by the week, it's not even by the month or a decade, but by the minute some days. So I just want to invite everyone first just to have grace for yourself. Because it's not easy, no matter what path you're walking. We all have different lived experiences, and I hope that everyone has a support system that can hold them up. I'm very fortunate to have familial and sort of friend-made, village-made, support system. So just kind of wanted to frame that. I have notes, but I feel like they're not even necessarily relevant right now. So I'm looking forward to being in dialogue with my comrade here. So Cleveland Votes, I'm sure you just heard Dr. Hardaway talk about our organization. We're a small but mighty organization. We've actually been around since 2014, have evolved very organically over the years. My sister in justice, Crystal Bryan, and I co-founded the organization really with not an understanding of what we were doing, if I'm being honest. Her and I, at the time, were working 2 separate full-time jobs, serving in community with individuals impacted by the criminal legal system. And through our professional work together, we identified the need to prioritize and elevate the narrative that individuals returning from prison or jail do regain their right to vote, and that they are a segment of our population that should be acknowledged and respected and appreciated by those that are seeking office and those that are in office. And that's where our work started. Her and I were going into different Northeast Ohio prisons, our local jail, communicating with individuals within those facilities, having voter education conversations in the community. I have another dear comrade here, Susan from Nova, really just trying to educate people. We are fortunate in Ohio. We do a lot of things wrong, but in the case of those regaining their right to vote, it is a seamless process. Someone comes out of prison, they just have to re-register. If they're sitting downtown at the county jail and they haven't been sentenced, then they can register. A lot of people don't know that. They can cast their ballot through absentee, and we have groups like Nova, who's present here this evening, and many others that for years have been vigilant and making sure that access was made available to those sitting in our county jail. But I think pretty quickly, her and I realized that returning citizens were unfortunately one of many historically disenfranchised members of our community, and began to sort of expand who we were in service to, always understanding that we don't have everyone's lived experience. And it's really important that we don't just erect ourselves in a community or erect ourselves in a part of the city that we have not gained trust and have not built relationships. So over the last 8 years, that has been the cornerstone of our organization, is building relationships and developing trust with those that are most proximate to the issues in our community, whether we're talking about housing disenfranchisement, equitable access to health and healthy living, individuals who are impacted by the criminal legal system, because we can't encompass all of that, right? We were, for her and I, the first couple of years, it was just the two of us. And, we were able to raise funds and invite new members of our team to join us in 2018, and then we expanded a little bit this year. But it hasn't been easy, in part because being a Black-led, Black-run organization is just not easy. There are a lot of tools and resources that we just had to figure out along the way. And then layering that with the complexity of what is happening in our communities, not just in the democracy space, but really what is impacting our community. So for us, doing our work, again, is centered in the relationships that we have built over the years. We serve as a funder, so we invest directly in organizations that are doing work to improve the civic infrastructure of our community. Often, many groups are either volunteer only or very small staffed organizations, but they are doing the most difficult, challenging, heart-wrenching work, and they're not being invested in. There are structures beyond what we as an organization can control. Wealth disparities, the way wealth has been accumulated in this country, our philanthropic sector and the ways in which it operates, and the ways that folks are trying to undesign. And we have a gratitude, for these systems that are trying to undesign their inequitable practices and policies. But the reality is, there are still urgent needs in our community today. Organizations need resources today to be able to fulfill their work. So our sort of tagline is educate, connect, and empower. Education is really important to us, and we think that comes in multitude of forms. Right now, we're educating and connecting and empowering, but there's a lot of fluidity in how our tagline operates. But we really strive to provide the resources, not just monetary resources, but tangible resources to organizations and serve as a connector of information. It is quite overwhelming to navigate through democracy and civic engagement work. And by no means do we have, everything figured out or have all the answers, but we try our best to make sure that our partners have the resources that they need. We connect in a multitude of different ways in the community, whether it's organizing like we're doing tomorrow, elevating people to come down to the polls early. Tomorrow is the first Saturday of early voting. Little plug there. We'll talk more about the dates and what y'all need to know in a little bit. But making sure that people are connected to what's happening, whether we're talking about redistricting, as Dr. Hardaway mentioned a few moments ago, or what's happening in DC, or what's happening down at the State House in Columbus. We want to make sure people have the information they need. And ultimately, we're trying to shift power, right? We acknowledge and we understand that we are part of a system that we're trying to dismantle. And we don't take that lightly, right? Because none of us know a world rid of racism or fill in the blank, any of the isms. So we also, in real time, are trying to undesign practices that have been ingrained in us, since the beginning of our days. Some of us have been around a little bit longer than 2 decades, Raja. And even still, I don't also feel old, but that's okay. But really, for the amount of time I've been on this earth, no need to say what that amount of time is, something has been penetrating my brain. There are practices and the ways that this country wants us to operate, and the way they want us to operate is not communal. It's not reciprocating and healing. It's not nurturing, right? These are things that we sometimes have to elect to do on our own, or the village that we have created. And that could be a, man, woman, maid village of your friends and neighbors, or your familiar village. But it's hard some days, right, to resist what is commonplace in our country. And we're trying to do that in real time as an organization, as individuals. We have a very close-knit team, and we keep ourselves accountable that we are part of a system that we're also trying to dismantle. So we understand the duality of us being a funder and how that shows up in community. There are power dynamics that can be intimidating, and we try to do our best to sort of dismantle what those practices are to make sure that we are being equitable. I think the last thing before I turn it over to my comrade here is, reflecting on the theme of this convening, respect, renew, reimagine. I know throughout this conversation we'll talk about each of those, but at the end of the day, we have to ground our work in respecting one another. Respecting one another does not mean we agree, right? But we have to, one, create that foundation of trust so that we can have dialogue with one another and learn from one another, right? I may come to you with a position on XYZ thing that we're talking about, but I also have to be humble enough to know that I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers. And there may be information that you can provide me that can either illuminate me and or expand the way I'm thinking about a particular issue. I think the renewal comes in the form of the healing, right? And acknowledging that that is not secondary, that's not ancillary, that is embedded deeply in everything that we have to do. And there's multiple forms of healing. There's individual harms that have been inflicted upon us, and everyone has their own journey. But then there are systematic harms, right? And Dr. Hardaway alluded to many of those that we've experienced through horrific acts of voter suppression, and we'll talk about that more. But what most excites me, I think, is the reimagination, right? It's what is that future destination? I have a dear friend and comrade who is just around the corner at Third Space Action Lab, Mordecai Cargill. Some of you in the room know him. And years ago, I remember being in a session that he was facilitating, and he asked us, all of us, to close our eyes. And he said, you know, think about what liberation and freedom feels like. He's a huge fan of Robert and Kelly, Freedom Dreams. If you haven't read it, great book. And he asked us to close our eyes, and he asked us to, all the senses. What does it taste like? What does it feel like? What do you hear? And it's kind of an uncomfortable exercise, I'm not gonna lie. And I've been through it like dozens of times with him, because we don't often create that safe space to dream. Right? We're so saddled with fill in the blank, right? You know, I think about just what happened today, right? And all the things that were almost impediments to get me here on time, today. But they're sort of futile, right? I had 20 minutes to kind of like defuse my day before getting here. And I'm not saying, being dismissive of my day and what happened, but at the end of the day, like, those are acts of things that are happening. But what was most important was, how can I be present for you all, right? And so I had to sort of shed any sort of stress or angst that I was feeling from the day so that I could really be present with you all this evening. And I think creating those spaces where we can really reimagine what our collective future can be, it is about the collective. There's no way that I, Erica, can lead alone. I'm really clear with my team that we are a team. And I, sort of rejects the notion of being the boss. Lawrence and I were just talking about this, because it's equal, right? We are at equal footing. Each of us have something to contribute to the work that we're doing collectively together. I have stuff that I can lend them. They have things that they can lend me. And if we don't, sort of truly acknowledge that, then I think we're not moving in the direction that I really am looking forward to, which is a more liberated future. So thank you all again for having us.
So much of what you said resonates with me, I think, which makes sense, given the relationship we have and the work we've done together. I do want to thank Dr. Hardaway and Dr. Chump and Case Western Reserve for having me here. I am Lawrence Daniel Caswell, managing editor for managing editor community for Signal Cleveland, but Signal Cleveland is really a new newsroom, a nonprofit newsroom that we're building around the work of Cleveland Documenters, which is the work that I've been doing for the past couple of years with Lila Mills and with Rachel DeSalle, and like just base level what Cleveland Documenters is. I mean, it's a lot of things, but what Cleveland Documenters does is trains and pays Cleveland residents to document local government meetings. We're a website that lists local meetings. We're probably we have not a fully comprehensive, but the most complete list of local government meetings, county, city meetings in a single place anywhere. So we're a website with that information. We're also a kind of civic side hustle. Our documenters are taking 1 or 2 assignments a week and getting paid to do that work to make what happens in public meetings a little bit more accessible. And we're really a community that's really focused around learning and the exchange of civic information and knowledge, and focused around making that civic information more accessible to residents, with really the goal of trying to build the capacity of residents and strengthen local democracy. But this topic is not even but, this topic is of tonight is sort of interesting to me, given the week that I have had, and not like an exceptional week. I mean, I'm in a startup where we're a couple weeks away from launch. We've just hired 10 people, and I've had a little bit of a stressful week. But last night I was reminded we had our normal gathering of documenters, which we do sometimes monthly, sometimes every other month. We haven't done this one because we've been really busy in a couple months, and for as stressed out and not like ready to be on a Zoom call for 2.5 hours, facilitating that call, that I wasn't ready for that. At the same time, I know my experience over the past 2 years, which is every single time I get on that Zoom call, not any Zoom call, but Documenters Community of Practice, our gathering and learning exchange, where we get together and talk with each other and talk about what we're seeing and exchange information. There's never been a single time in that 2 years that I didn't feel better at the end of the call, that I didn't feel like, man, I was so glad I was here. Like every single time. And thinking about that coming here today and what I was going to say, because I didn't plan it out too much, I really think about my past 2 years with Documenters. I mean, it was a very small team. There was just the three of us at the head and really a team of 6 over that time. And I said this many times, and like I still thinking back, I can't think of a way it's not true. I don't know how I would have gotten through the pandemic if I was not doing Documenters work. And not just Documenters work, but working with Documenters. If we weren't involved in this community together, working so that we all feel like we're making progress and all taking a piece and talking with them and doing that, it got me through this. And so I thought that maybe what I would like to do is spend a little bit of time talk about how I got here, how we did this. And then I will also say I am going to shut up because I feel like taking your questions is the much more entertaining part of this for you and for me. And also my favorite form of communication is quite honestly the lecture. So I could be here all night and I don't think anybody wants that. So that's it. As I said, Documenters trains and pays residents to document local government meetings. We really started here thinking about, I mean, these data points came later, but this is a sort of situation. I'd actually want to mention the great survey that Cleveland Votes did with Policy Matters Ohio, that I really feel like it sort of lays the foundation of the work, the reason why we wanted to do Documenters, the reason why we wanted to bring it to Cleveland, this notion that of low propensity voters, folks who are registered but don't go to vote. Like the biggest barrier, without going into the numbers, the biggest barrier wasn't apathy. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they just didn't have enough access to information so that they could understand what decision to make, on the one hand. On the other hand, at the sort of beginning of their current round of funding journalism, which I understand is going around, and honestly, where I'm sitting right now, I'm grateful for it. The Cleveland Foundation and Knight Foundation did a study of the Cleveland news ecosystem, and there's a bunch of things in that study, but the thing that really jumped out for me from that was one data point, and that's of local news in Northeast Ohio, of news that is locally originating and locally focused, only 11% of that news served a critical information need. Only 11% of all the news that we get actually meets our needs. There was an article as we've been doing this thing in the New Yorker that mentioned our newsroom, not named yet, and they described Cleveland as a news desert. And I've heard that phrase before. Obviously, food deserts. I live in Collinwood, where our Dave's just closed, and that is somewhat of a news desert. But I don't think news desert applies to Cleveland, Northeast Ohio. There's lots of news here. There's a ton of information. It's just that it doesn't meet the need. And so this really began not by me, but by Lila Mills, who is the editor-in-chief of Signal Cleveland and was associate director of programming at Neighborhood Connections, which is where Cleveland Documenters was first housed. Now we're at Signal Cleveland. But she had, it's a community building organization. There's some folks, Tony Vento, shout out to Tony Vento. And Lila had the experience of working with folks in community, and folks wanted to get more information about government and get more involved in government, but they just couldn't figure out how to get in. They couldn't figure out how to get that information. They had a whole program where folks were like, well, the way we have to do, we're just going to run for office. And everyone tried to run for office to just figure out a way to participate more in local government. And even that was like beating their heads against the wall. So Lila was at a conference where she saw a presentation from folks from City Bureau, where the Documenters program was created, and they were talking about documenters and laying out what it was. And one of my favorite things that Daryl said that day, and he says it all the time, Daryl Holiday, I should say, one of the founders of City Bureau. And City Bureau's a civic journalism lab based in Chicago, initially on the south and west sides of Chicago. Now it has coverage all over. But they had run a Documenters program in Chicago, doing the same thing we're doing here for since 2015. And Daryl always says that like the skills and tools of journalism aren't just like professional skills. They're just not just for journalists. They're actually absolutely required for a functioning democracy. Everybody needs to know these skills. And that really appealed to Lila. Lila's the one, I mean, like, she will not claim it, but I will say it right here to all of you. Lila's the reason why we have Cleveland Documenters in Cleveland. She got the funding. She brought Documenters to Cleveland and housed it at Neighborhood Connections. And then we got started. And trying to figure out how to tell this story, because it's been a really interesting 2 years. We sort of lost my train of thought. Documenters is really interesting to us. The way that these 2 years have gone, we honestly thought that we were going to have to, as we were building up and getting this platform together and talking with folks, we thought we were going to have to convince folks that documenting local government meetings, Board of Zoning Appeals, Board of Building Standards, City Council, and all of their subsequent committees, we really thought we were going to have to convince folks that it was interesting, that it wasn't dry. I think when we had our first training, we really found that folks were hungry for it. Which I think the poll that you guys did with Policy Matters Ohio really bears that out. Like, nobody is apathetic. Nobody doesn't want information, and that information like leads to understanding, and understanding is what makes you feel like you have an like agency, what makes you feel like you have power in your world. And like, I know power is an interesting word, and I'm always cautious to say we're not giving power to anybody or passing power on. I honestly tend to think of power. I've studied physics among other things, but I tend to think of power the way we talk about energy in science, where any object, anything has both a kinetic and potential energy. I think about power in the same way. Like no one doesn't have power, but some folks have kinetic power where they have access to that power and can use it at will. And some folks have potential power where they have all the power that they need, they just don't have the tools to access that power and use it at will. The work we do at Cleveland Documenters, which is really just training folks how to understand local government, how to watch this meeting and not do anything more than just summarize it and describe it to the way you would describe what happened in that meeting to your neighbor, so that they can understand that. Like, that's it at base level. But just that small thing has been so powerful for the folks in the Documenters community. And I'll say, in the 2 years that we've been doing Cleveland Documenters, we've trained about 600 Cleveland residents from every zip code in the city of Cleveland and most of the zip codes in Cuyahoga County to document local government meetings. And now, as I said, this is like it's a side work. This is no one's main job. It's barely even a part-time job. It's like 1 or 2 assignments a week minimum you'll get for an assignment that's anything less than 2 hours, $56. But we added an additional $16 an hour as it goes on. And for so that's 600 people total. For any 90-day period, we have about 40 to 75 documenters taking at least one assignment in that period. And that group of folks goes in and out. But I'm just sitting here thinking about those folks and the experiences that I've had with those folks. And I'll say, we have our gatherings, we have our trainings, but we've also been remote. We launched Documenters in December of 2020. Although I'll say when I started in August of 2020, the word was, oh, we're actually going to hold off launching this for a little bit and just wait for the pandemic to die down, and then we'll get started. I honestly, in a lot of ways, I feel like, and it may seem weird to say, but I feel like the pandemic was a blessing for us, because all of these meetings, all of these rooms that residents that are like by Ohio's Open Meetings Act, you have access to, you are allowed to be present in, all of these spaces don't actually feel like that. Folks don't feel like they're invited in. The question that we get, and I'll say all the Documenters programs, there are Documenters programs in Chicago, Detroit, now Minneapolis, and now new programs in Atlanta, Fresno, and Omaha. But the question that folks get when they first sign up to Documenters or first come to ask about Documenters, when they hear about a meeting, am I allowed to go to that? I on the one hand, I utterly understand that. But on the other hand, that's a crazy question. It's yours. It's your space. Everybody in that room is doing that for you. It's absolutely your space. So giving folks that awareness and that knowledge and those extra tools, I'm sorry, I just keep thinking about individual Documenters. Like the interactions that we have, not just our gatherings, but like the main way that since these meetings have been remote, sorry, I should actually go back. Meetings being virtual is a great boon to us because folks who just had a little bit of interest in this could, if they had internet access, get online and watch any city council meeting on you. They didn't have to go to the room and feel uncomfortable. And it's honestly been great for us to like spend 2 years like talking with folks and getting folks to the spot where, hey, now that it's open, like I know that I belong there, right? It's been great for us that you could just sit in your room and watch in your house and watch this meeting. And I'll say the relationships, that it's like the crucial part of this work that we do. And honestly, the bulk of the relationships, it's not like in our training, the bulk of relationship building, it's not the training, we do some there, it's not in the gathering. It's in the feedback. Every assignment that a documenter does, we give them feedback on that assignment, and that sort of relationship of like, hey, you've done this, and we all say that what we're doing is a learning community. We're all learning together, not just documenters, but us. We're learning about you. We're all sort of building all of our civic knowledge. This sort of like, you did this assignment. Maybe think about these things. You did really great here. You did this here. I love what you did here. That little very simple thing creates a conversation, a back and forth, and like really the most crucial relationships other than my family that I've had over the past 2 years. As I said, doing this Documenters work got me through the pandemic. I think about individual Documenters, like one by the name of Tila, who was a Cleveland resident, has a child, was really just sort of interested in building her writing and journalism skills, and took a couple of assignments, signed up, did our training, took a few assignments, really took to it, really loved it, wanted to dig in and do more. We ended up finding a little bit of money to do a grant for a sort of environmental justice project, and Tila joined a couple other Documenters. She was really interested in using vacant spaces and how that tied into environmental justice. And we had no plans. It wasn't like a newsroom, like, oh, we're going to write stories. We were like, let's give these folks money and have them sort of guide figure out where they're going to go themselves. They produced a documentary, and that was last summer. Since then, Tila has become a convener in Cleveland with her own project called Healing Spaces Cle, where she's taking this conversation about vacant spaces and taking what she did with Documenters and making this into like the convening conversations with other folks. Like I think about another documenter who I will not name, who had some mental health issues, and like she sent this to me in an email not that long after she had been, maybe like 6 months after she'd started with us, and was having difficulty getting back into the workplace. She told us that doing these Documenters assignments, being able to take a piece, feeling like she was part of a community and learn was part of her getting back into working. She still takes assignments, but she got a full-time job, and she feels like that was part of it. I think about folks, actually one of my favorite folks, one of my favorite Documenters, Denise. She is great. She has maybe taken 2 assignments in 2 years. She's been at every single gathering. She, sort of eases up to her assignments. We give her feedback. She's not that sure about it, but she has been at every meeting, participates at every meeting, and has brought like 6 people into Documenters, like 6 people to become part of this community. Like these are the folks. These are the folks that have gotten me through this, and I really feel like we've gotten through this together. This is this core that we have built. And there are all sorts of things that I was going to tell you guys about tonight, but I haven't gotten to any of that. But really the harder one I want to say, and then we should get to questions, is that with Signal Cleveland, this newsroom that we're building, this community, Documenters, is at the core of it. It's not like, oh, this will be the Documenters on the side. We really feel like the work we're doing is building around the work that we've done as Documenters. The things that Documenters see, the questions that they ask, that will guide the reporting. So anyway, I will shut up, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say and answer your questions.
I do have just a quick response to what Lauren shared. I'm reminded of what Dr. Hardaway said at the beginning, for the people, by the people, and how so many of these systems do not feel inviting, right? Do not feel like I belong, and really understanding what belonging means for you, right? As a person, as an individual, as a community. And then I think also just thinking about the transfer of energy. So I'm not a physicist. I did not study physics, but I do also think about power as a current, right? And how we transfer power, right? What good is it for me to have the information if I'm hoarding that information, right? But we know that is how some people operate, right? To me, the information is only as good as my ability to share it. But often, again, the systemic impediments or barriers are done purposeful, right? So we also have to acknowledge that, right? There's a reason why, the hundreds of documenters you've been able to recruit over the last couple of years, have the sentiment that they have, right? Because we're not elevating or promoting this sort of transfer of knowledge. It's up here, you're up here as elected a person A, and I'm down here as constituent or resident or community member. And I'm also reminded there was a gentleman in New York, I'm part of the Participatory Budgeting Coalition, which I'm happy to talk more about. And we're constantly looking at other cities that have successfully implemented this practice. And there is a counselor in Brooklyn, if I'm not mistaken, who is, and it's great. I'll see if I can find or share with Dr. Hardaway and Chup the TEDx talk that he did. But he talks about community patents. And he's framing it in the context that, whether you're a developer, fill in the blank, this type of person, that type of person, government, elected official, often, this is a very general statement, so it doesn't apply to everyone, you come in and you tell community, this is what you need, this is what needs to happen. And often, community has already determined the solution. And if anything, community has already addressed said solution, right? Without resources, without policy or legislation, right? Because community takes care of community, and that there is these the way he frames it, and I won't be able to do it justice, but it's unwritten community patents, right? They exist, right? And when I was listening to his talk, I was reminded of my own street. I grew up in New York, very very close knit block that I grew up on, and I think about the unwritten rules, right? I couldn't go past this light post, after this hour. Otherwise, Miss Josie was going to tell my mama. I couldn't go up this side block because, at this age, because, my mom was fearful of this, vacant home that, she didn't want anything to happen to me. The ways in which the block took care of the block, right? These things that just happen, right? And not say I took them for granted or have taken them for granted, but I think as I get a little bit older, Raja, just a little bit, I have a greater appreciation for some of these, what I would relate to as patents or just community agreements that weren't necessarily written, but community is taking care of community. And I think understanding that, again, democracy is supposed to be for the people, by the people, that we do already have this power, right? The power already exists, right? And so it is incumbent upon ourselves, organizations like Signal and Documenters and Cleveland Votes, to make sure that we are shifting knowledge and information in a way that, at the end of the day, I don't want to be on the front front lines. And I'm really clear, hopefully Bree, my teammate, would attest to this, like, it's not about me, it's not about Cleveland Votes, right? Because in some ways, I hope we can dissolve one day, not because I don't think it's a dope organization, I'm not proud of it, but it's like, our service to community should at some point allow us to dissolve, right? If what we are intending to do in the ways that we're trying to invest in people and invest in organizations, that it's not just about us, but it's about the dozens of leaders that already exist in our community that now have the tools and the resources, or their amplified tools and resources that they need to do their work.
I want to open it up for questions. I think we see there's a microphone over here, Councilman. You guys can make your way to the microphone. In anticipation of the questions that are going to come, I wonder if you could speak to misinformation. I heard you talk about the gathering of information, right, Lawrence? I also hear you talking, Erica, about the importance of people being informed, and that this isn't about apathy, but right, but that the work is being driven. How does your work, right, combat misinformation, if at all? Or what would you be willing to share with us about what we can do to ensure that people have the information that's necessary to be informed when they go to the polls?
Yeah, for sure. So, when we did this research that Lawrence referenced last year with Policy Matters, we asked a myriad of questions. We asked, where do people get their information? We asked, what do you consider trusted resources of information? So everything from traditional, news or TV news, paper, all the traditional sort of media sources, social media, your family, your network, and things of that nature. Family and friends was at the top, right? And so the analogy that I use is, I think the people that know us as an organization trust our information. But if you don't know us from a can of paint, right, you would better receive information from Cleveland Votes if Dr. Hardaway or Dr. Chupp, right? Like, them, right? And they reshare our content and they're like, oh, okay, cool, right? Like, Dr. Hardaway is not going to share some craziness on her page. I know she's going to put like factual information out there. So what does that mean? That means that the importance of a network, right? Because there is not one central location. That's one problem, right? To factualinformation101.com or, I don't know, but like, there's not one central location where you can gather information related to elections, both local, state, and federally or nationally. And at the same time, there are so many resources, it's hard for most people on a day-to-day basis to figure out, how do I wade through all this information? Thankfully, we do the labor for y'all. So that's part of our role. But again, that information is only as good as you are sharing it with others. So part of how we combat dis and misinformation is making sure that we are a trusted source and also being real with community. So like, as it's been referenced a couple times, 2020 was probably a ish show. I'm trying to make sure I know we're being recorded. My mama might see it one day. It was crazy. We'll just, it was a little wild in 2020. And so we were combating mis and disinformation coming both related to the election as well as the census. And one of the things that was a big point of contention on the census, as folks may recall, was the addition of a question around immigration status. And it kept changing. Like, it almost felt like it kept changing every other day or bi-weekly. And, in relationship with communities, or in relationship both with communities and organizations that work with populations who were fearful about taking the census. And when they asked us, like, where is my information going to go? As hard as it was for me to say this, I had to say, I don't know. Yeah. I had to tell them I didn't know because of the state of affairs at that moment in 2020 as a result of the president that was in office at that time. I said, I can't actually tell you. It, if you go to whatever, documentation of the census and like what it's supposed to do and the confidentiality it's supposed to have, logic says you are okay and you are safe and no one is going to come knocking at your door after you complete the census. But in that moment, we had to be truthful. And when things change, even if like I said ABC to Lawrence at 9 a.m. and at 1 o'clock we got an alert about something else, which happened almost every other day in 2020, both on election and census, then we had to send a retraction out, right? So we might have just sent out a communication to people about A, B, and C, and then 3-4 hours later we had to send it out. But I think that allowed us to, again, to continue to be a trusted source, because we're demonstrating our own vulnerability. Like, hey, y'all, we trying to figure this out too, right? Like, things are changing by the moment, by the minute. But I think, not dismissing people's intelligence, right? If I would have just said, oh, well, Mrs. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, you're good. Like, don't worry about it. And then if they had someone knock on their door a year later, now they're looking at me like, this woman told me, she's supposed to be a trusted organization in my community, and she told me I was good. Well, I can't guarantee that for you. I can only share the information that I have. So I think that is how we're trying. But at the end of the day, your network is your best option.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. In a lot of ways, I feel like Documenters, in some ways, is trying to be that network, and I don't, not to only be the only part of that network, and I don't have any illusions that we're going to train the whole of Northeast Ohio to be documenters. But I do feel like our documenters are going to end up going back and being key folks in their neighborhood, distributing information. But I also feel like where we're at with misinformation is also a function of. There are a number of things, a function of the decay of civic information systems, which are really about the change in the city. And yes, the news is absolutely a part of that, but also just the changes in the city in the last 50 years, folks moving out to the suburbs, largely, largely due to the initial loans given to developers to create the suburbs, which were segregationist, segregating those folks, the industry moving out from the center cities, which is really just a response to the Cold War and trying to make industry less vulnerable. That happened in the 50s, highways running through towns, all these things that have separated us so that folks, don't happen to work and live with each other in the same way that they did. There isn't as much intra-class contact as there was. It's very possible to go to work and go home and only see folks that are like you. But those interactions are how we shared civic information, how we got real information, and how we made sure the information was diverse, because we weren't just talking to people like us. We were talking to people who were cutting across class, the very sort of foundation of cosmopolitan city culture. So there's all of that have changed the civic information system, civic and social information systems over the 50 years. But also there's just the way the news has existed. And I'll say, I'm never been a reporter. I work in journalism now. I have managing editor in my title, but I also often say I've long been more journalism adjacent. But I also say the way the news functions and has functioned for the most part in this country, at least for the last 100 years, is not prioritizing information. Information to the news is like a residual of news. Yeah. You read news articles, and if you read them regularly enough, you just glean information about how your government works, about when city council meets, about how to apply for the exterior paint program. All of these things, the goal is not to give you this information. You just sort of pull it off. But with a changing news ecosystem, with many fewer papers, I use that the sort of mud to water analogy. The thing that you need, the information, is the water, but you have to get a bunch of mud to get it, right? That may work when you have a city that already has a very robust civic and social information system and 2 or 3 major papers with 600 reporters who are going out everywhere. It's a lot easier to get water from that mud because there's a whole lot more mud. In the late 90s, the Plain Dealer had 300 plus reporters. Cleveland.com has 30 some reporters. There's way less mud. It's way harder to get water. And so to my mind, part of fixing this misinformation piece is trying to figure out how to reorient news, flipping that, making the purpose of news, giving you the information you need and helping you actually understand your government. Making a news article, reading a news article and feeling like, hey, I get that. And not always, I sort of hear folks in journalism say we need to move people to action. I mean, yeah, sure, that would be great if you moved them to action, but I feel like it's just as honorable and useful to say, I understand that, and I know now that I don't have to do anything with that. That's a power, and that's a decision. But we need a news that's really designed for that, and it's not designed for that at all right now. And I think if we had a news ecosystem that was designed around providing folks things that are useful to them that they can use how they want, news as a tool, we wouldn't be talking as much about misinformation. I mean, I think the news would be more of a trusted partner. And I'll say, and this is not a plug, but it is part of how we're conceiving of the Signal Cleveland newsroom, trying to flip that dynamic and make the news be useful to residents, not just entertaining or tell you what happened. That's not enough.
I want to thank Aisha Bell Hardaway and Dr. Mark Chupp and the Social Justice Institute for having this forum. I got it on my email the other day, and I said something told me to come here. Before I got here today, I was listening to the radio about Paul Pelosi, and they asked for Nancy Pelosi, and he was hit by a hammer. And I listened to Roger Bell, the poet. I enjoyed her. But Erica Anthony and Lawrence Caswell. And what I want to ask you is this. I think about what's going on in our country. I think about voting. And I think about, and my question to you is this. I want to ask everybody in this room to speak to people in their homes, on the left of their home and the right of their home, about the importance of voting. If there's anything that's come to my heart about what happened today to Paul Pelosi, it's how important it is for us to vote. My question to you, Ms. Anthony, and to you, Mr. Caswell, is what can we do to vote? Because ultimately, all this is about voting. In Ohio, you don't have to go to the polls any longer. You can vote by mail. We have to November 8th, 2 weeks to vote. If we're going to make the change, we have got to vote. So I said I was going to get up here and just hit my heart to tell everyone, after you hear all this good information, you have to go home and talk to your neighbors. Some of us say to our neighbors, we don't even talk to them anymore. We are missing community. We have to recreate that, Hardaway and Chupp. So I'm saying, and I'm asking you guys to confirm, we have got to vote. I think the unfortunate thing is that it's something like what happened to Paul Pelosi, Nancy's husband, to bring this thing home. We have got 2 weeks to vote. And I'm not going to tell you to vote for the Democrats. I'm not going to tell you to vote for the Republicans, the Independents, but I'm going to tell you, you have to vote. That's what you do, Miss Anthony, the voting thing. But if we don't vote, we don't count. So we have to make that happen. If we don't do anything today, yesterday, today, tomorrow, we have got to vote. So I'm asking you, a humble person, to talk to your neighbors about the importance of them voting, because we have got to do that. What we do today is not going to affect me. I'm an elected official, or any other elected, but what's going to affect our kids and grandkids years from now. It's going to happen today. It is about the vote. So, Miss Anthony and Mr. Coswell, do you confirm that we have got to get to our neighbors? There's someone we don't talk to today about voting.
We have to stop treating voting as a transactional act and think about the ways in which democracy shows up in our life every single day. And I think that's part of the disconnect, and that's part of the ethos of who we are as Cleveland Votes, right? We only vote 3 times a year because we had a special primary. But there's hundreds of other days in the year, right? And you know, thinking about the role that organizations like Cleveland Documenters play is so critical. I have served as a policy person and a lobbyist. Like, I geek out over this stuff all the time. I'm that nerd. And so I love the Documenters, right? Because my day-to-day work doesn't allow me to sit in council meetings or listen to elected officials. So if I have a particular issue of interest, I know I can like head to the Twitter and I can go to the Documenters page branch and I can see the recap of that zoning meeting or that particular council meeting. But I think part of the information deficit is purposeful, right? Making sure that not just people have the basic logistical knowledge around, how to cast your ballot and where to go and where to get the information to be informed, but we don't make it easy for people to know about the issues on the ballot or to find information, factual, reliable, equitable information about the candidate. So that is an active challenge, right? I think organizations like myself, or our organization and Lawrence, that we're trying to combat. But I can give the commercial. So here we go. You can cast your ballot by mail, in person early at the Board of Elections, which is located on East 30th between Chester and Euclid Avenues. Early voting is underway right now. The Cleveland Votes and many partners are pulling up to the polls tomorrow. We're going to have food. We're going to have a DJ. We're going to have family-friendly activities. My girl Bree made some cool stickers for the kids. She got a kid's ballot. We're just going to be posted up at the board. And we've been encouraging people to come down and really encouraging people to say, you don't have to wait till November 8th. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks. Life is life. Life will do us like life does us, right? So you don't have to wait. You can go to 443-VOTE, which is the Board of Elections, both phone number and their website, to get the early voting hours. Make it fun. Bring your kids, bring your grandma, bring your brother, bring your neighbor. When we hear people, and Susan, my colleague in the audience, knows this, when we're registering people or engaging people, like, oh, no, I'm good. Okay, cool. You good? Then I need you to holler at 5 people, right? It's not just enough for you to be good. This is, again, a communal act, and we have to make sure everybody's good, our neighbors, our family, our friends, and don't assume, right, that just because you're motivated and you're encouraged that your family members or your neighbors or your friends are going to be the same. So making sure they have that information. So cast your ballot early. It's a little close on the vote by mail, but you can still do it. But I would encourage you to think about going down to the Board of Election early, or on election day, the polls are open from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. We have tons of information about election protection. Obviously, that is of most concern to us, that if you are going to cast your ballot, you're not being intimidated or you're not being harmed in any way from casting your ballot. And there are will be volunteers out on election day to ensure that people have a safe, pleasant experience to cast their ballot. But I just go back to my point. We can't think about it as a transaction, right? It's how do we develop a sentiment around the ways in which democracy shows up in our daily life. We have to encourage people to be active participants in their community. How many of us had civics in school? Right. And the thing that we hear now often is like, cool. I had that. I learned about the branches of government, but no one ever engaged in dialogue with me. Then what does that actually mean in practice, right? My husband's a history, social studies. That's what his licensure is in. And this is what, he is often hearing from the students that he's engaged with over the years. It's like, okay, I know the branches of government. I know this. I know what the president does. I know what Congress does, right? But we need to provide more specificity at the high school, really, all through K through 12, but definitely by high school level, to really help students and young people to understand what does this look like. There's an amazing educator at CMSD, Gail Addison, who has a Civics 2.0 program. I've had a chance to spend.
That's what I'm getting ready to talk about.
Okay, so I won't jump ahead. So anyway, just understanding that we have to contextualize the ways in which voting impacts us, and that's really important, so that people can see themselves in this process. Each of us in this room have a issue or 10 issues that are of most importance to us, and every one of those issues are showing up on our ballot. I guarantee you, I would put money on that every issue that you are concerned about is showing up on the ballot on November 8th. It may not explicitly say healthcare. It may not explicitly say child obesity. It may not explicitly say mental health, but there are people running for these seats that are responsible for allocating dollars, legislation, policy that impact that. So that's how we have to look at it. What is most pressing and important for us, and how do those values show up on our ballot? I'm not going to steal your thunder.
No worries. I'm sorry. No worries, Lawrence.
I'm sorry, Keisha. If I could just add one thing to that.
I want to hear it from you.
Yep. Yes. I mean, everything Erica said, but the thing that I was really struck with, also from that Cleveland Votes Policy Matters poll, with that a major barrier to voting was information. I mean, when we think about even that high school civics class, which I only got a little bit of, and very few kids are getting, those classes are oriented around national government. I never had anybody tell me how local government works, how my city works, how my planning commission works, any of that. And if you don't have that information, you don't know what voting for those local offices does for you. If you don't understand how that works, I mean, and understanding how something works is what makes you feel like you can take a part in it. That is why I feel like having a news oriented not towards telling you what happened and who won or what's going on right now, but a news oriented around providing you with useful information about your government, about local government, is at a base level need for getting to the point of voting. Like getting you to the ballot box is not even, I mean, and this is not, I know, it's not even the 2 weeks or the months before. It's years before in the gradual building of information and understanding that you get of local government. That understanding is what makes you feel like, I can actually go here and I know what my choice is, and I feel like my choice is doing something. That's how we get, I feel like you got to do the push to get folks out to vote, but we can't just stop on November 9th. Like, we have to build up a whole new civic and social information system because so much of it has been decayed in so many ways, some of the ways I've talked about already. We've got to do that if we want to feel like, people to feel like, I can make a difference.
Thank you. And I just want to say briefly, 2 weeks ago in the city of East Cleveland, Voting Matters came. 3 big buses from Atlanta, Georgia. They're going all around the country. And they gave out a book called the 1619 Project. You're probably familiar with that. And if you look at that, it tells you about what's going on in this country. What's going on in this country now has gone on for the last 250 years. We have got to vote, and we have got to love each other. Thank you.
Gosh, I'm like, I got a lot of things going on because I was here yesterday, but educator, right? Teacher at Glenville High School, Civics 2.0, co-advisor, adjunct faculty at Tri-C in the communication department. And the thing that I've been thinking about and sort of wanted to ask you to think about or, respond to is I was talking to a millennial colleague. I'm a Gen Xer, right? Tomorrow's my birthday, and I am thinking about, Raja being, I've been here for a minute. I feel like I'm in that bridge generation of, having a civics class, but I teach kids who are experiencing high school in a very different way than I did. And I think the thing that I've been thinking about with, I teach 11th and 12th graders. We went down to the Board of Elections today and did some early voting. I voted and the kids voted, and, they ring the bell and, congratulate them. And we were talking about the ballot, and the ballot is long and intense and things like that. So I'm just wondering, in terms of both of your programs, how can I do project-based sort of programs similar to you to be able to really engage kids beyond, yes, voting is important, but exactly, getting beyond that transactional and really engaging in local government, right? Because you're right, local government is where we really see the plan in action and where we begin to see how our daily lives are really affected. And the thing, I was talking to a millennial colleague, and he was saying to me how angry he is at Gen X, at all the damage we did to the world. And I'm like, no, that's baby boomers. Shut up. You know what I mean? But that's the disconnect. A lot of millennials, digital natives, my kids are digital, they're very angry that, and this was kind of the undercurrent I heard last night, there are a lot of young people who are very, very disappointed and angry in what I would say is the lack of initiative from prior generations and the kind of complacency around what it means to really be involved in the work of doing social justice, social change, equity, democracy, and participating in this wonderful thing we call the United States. So I just wanted to see how you can address that in terms of, my day-to-day is with, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and they're real discouraged. And so they don't want to participate. So how can I do that PBL sort of work, right?
our comments and our questions, please, so that we give our panelists a chance to be responsive. I note that the next person in line is a student, Ms. Noel. So after Ms. Anthony and Mr. Caswell ask the question, do you mind if we allow Ms. Francesca to ask her question, and then we'll stay over there? I appreciate you, gracious, kind one. Okay.
So I'll be brief.
Thank you.
There you go. So we literally just had a meeting this week with your colleague. So two quick things. One, I mentioned briefly this participatory budgeting. One of the ways, so pbcle, pbcle.org is one resource that I would encourage. Part of why we're really excited about bringing this to fruition in Cleveland is that it promotes engaging individuals 14 and up in the voting process of how the dollars are allocated through participatory budgeting. So happy to talk more, but that's in part what we talked about with Gail and another colleague this week. And I think the second point is, for me, how do we begin to codify some of these practices? Because we've engaged with dozens of individual educators, and it's been fantastic. But how do we make this system-wide within our districts, right? I think that's really what we would want to see. And there are efforts across the country that, we're trying not just bring back Civics 2.0 as a requirement in the curriculum, but really reimagine what that curriculum looks like, because it's not what it was, or it should not look like the same way it did as it was delivered in the 80s or the 90s, right? Because we're just in a different place. So that's an advocacy piece of, how do we encourage that these are not just electives for students to participate in, but that all the students are participating in a Civics 2.0.
Oh, there we go. If I could just add, to give a specific, small suggestion. I really I'm someone who, as I said, have been journalism adjacent, but relatively long journalism adjacent, and in this city for a long time. I felt before we started Documenters that I had a good handle on how the city works, on local government. I thought. Having still never attended any meeting, and I still haven't attended a single meeting, but I read every set of Documenters notes and every live tweet thread, and I'll tell you, in the 2 years that I've been doing that, I have exponentially learned more than I ever knew about local government. And one of my favorite things about Documenters, folks come to us from for a lot of different reasons. Some of them are interested in local government. Some of them are just looking for a gig, or just want to do something extra or participate in something. But one of my favorite pieces is when someone who wasn't that interested in it, but it's I'm going to try this out, comes and becomes an expert in this piece of local government. And that's the thing I love about Documenters Notes. It takes these meetings, which are complex and maybe boring, and have a lot of wonky elements in them, and makes them accessible. So I would quite honestly recommend putting your students in front of those notes. And just like this, and not even like a spread, but pick an agency, a single agency locally, and track what happens, track the conversation, because I think it's super interesting. And I also feel like what happens in local government affects you 10,000 times more than anything that happens in national government. And at the same time, in a city like Cleveland, it's 100 times less accessible to you than national government, for varying reasons. And they'll often tell you people don't care, but people absolutely care. I just wholeheartedly recommend. We've also talked with a few teachers on an individual basis about doing Documenters programs. I would love to do a pilot with CMSD students documenting Board of Education meetings. We've talked about it for a while. Maybe with a little bit of the Signal Cleveland capacity, we'll be able to get to that. But I wholeheartedly recommend you putting your students in front of those notes that all live at documenters.org. I think it would be great, and to just have that sense of that's how that works. Oh, I see where I can fit in there, or I see the difference that I can make there, or just I know how to make this decision. You know what I'm saying? It's been hugely. It's had a big impact on me. And as I said, I was in the news. You know what I'm saying? I was close to news with you at IdeaStream, right? I learned so much in these past 2 years. And I feel like I would love to see other people get that as well.
Awesome, thank you. Mm-hmm. Go right ahead.
Well, thank you for letting me speak next. I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible. But when we were talking about, when we started today, it was about sort of taking space and time to reflect and do self-healing. And the tagline for the event is the balm that like attends to what's ailing us, right? And that reminds me of like the story of the Fisher King, because it's like a Percival searching for the Holy Grail, and he meets the Fisher King and he asks, "Uncle, what ails you?" And through asking what the ailment is, he's able to attain the Grail. So in a way, it's kind of like community being able to respond to its own wounds is what brings salvation, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But to that end, when we're talking about how people absorb the news, they do that on a very individualistic basis. And when we're talking about democracy and liberation, a big cornerstone of democracy is civil society, and sort of being able to be a person in a political community, which is a community of similar interests. So since you two are talking more from a news point of view, I was wondering how you envision people who are already struggling with sort of having their own individualistic educational experience of the news can transition from their individual place into being part of a community place. Thank you.
I can speak to that a little bit. I can speak to that a little bit, largely because while I see obviously Signal Cleveland will be a newsroom, and some of what Cleveland Documentaries does is news, although we see ourselves more as civic information. We also see ourselves as a community. And so, I mean, it's part of what I was saying in the beginning, part of how I got through this and got through the pandemic was the sort of benefit of having this group of folks who all for, like one of our documenters said this. I was reading through interviews that we did a few months ago, and one of the things that our documentarist Dan had said was one of his favorite things about this community is that it's such a varied group of people, and everybody comes to it from something different, but we all have this like little piece of wanting to be part of a community where we feel like we could take a piece of it. And I think we often talk about us being an on-ramp to civic participation. Like, you can come in with whatever reason you came here, and you can be here with us in this space. And if you want to take a piece, take a piece. If you've taken that piece and you want more, we're trying to find on-ramps or ways for you to do more. I mean, I think that to me is holding space and the importance of holding space. And while we are focused on news, we are just as much, I feel in my bones that Cleveland Documentaries is the community, and do really feel like for this newsroom, the not just the community at large, but this community of Cleveland Documentaries is at the core of it, and honestly is the valuable thing about it. We have a bunch of reporters; they're all great. My honestly biggest concern, as we have gone from this like small sweater of 6 people to a newsroom of 16, 17 people, is figuring out how to get our new folks to understand that, like the culture building of getting them to understand the value of this community, and not in like an extractive way, but of being in collaboration and partnership with a variety of people, all taking a part in doing something productive to build other people's and our own understanding. I mean, I think that's what it requires. And that for me is how we get to the theme. I mean, it's meant that for me, it's meant that for Documentaries, and I feel like it's the most important piece, and the piece as this newsroom moves towards launch that is the most stressful for me, because I want to make sure as we expand and grow, we don't just like trot over that like we continue to make that the core and build that out. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's sort of where I was thinking. Thank you.
And I can just add one thing. I think I'm trying to figure out how to frame this. I want to sort of dismantle this notion that you have to have a specific title or organizational affiliation to affect change, right? And that there are sort of formal and organic ways to contribute to affecting change. And I think I always encourage people to really think about their individual gift and how they want to share that gift with community, which looks different for different people, right? I may be an accountant during the day, but I'm not trying to like balance your books at night, in community. Like that may not be the way I want to show up. I may have a creative gift, and that's what I want to bring to community. So it's about the power of self, the story of self, and like how you're starting with yourself. And I think for us at Cleveland Votes, we're not only investing monetarily, but we're investing our labor and our time and our energy in the individual organizations and creating, similar to Documenters, we also have a community of practice, right? So we have 29 organizations that we invested in, and then they have their respective networks, right? So if you just kind of think of these like concentric circles building out, but you don't have to have a specific title or a specific affiliation to affect change. It's really about starting with story of self and then building from that, like how do I build my network, and then find the ways that I can tap in, whether it's signing up to be a documenter or showing up at the polls with Cleveland Votes tomorrow. It's like then you kind of use that to leverage your energy to activate.
Good evening, and I'd like to first thank you all for being here, and I thank you for this opportunity. When I saw the topic, liberation through democracy, and I am so glad that Dr. Hardaway added the question mark. We know that all things arrive of narrative, and we know that in a democracy, especially a representative democracy, the media, journalism, the freedom of the press, the penny press, play a very important part in that it is the fourth estate. It is the means by which we help hold the other three official branches of government accountable. And I say to you, as I contemplate whether there can be liberation through a democracy when our democracy is so fatally broken, including the changing dynamic and role of journalists and journalism. And in the back of my consciousness, I just mentioned the name Julian Assange. So we know what happens to people when you challenge the estate and you are in the role of whistleblower. Personally, my narrative is I have been the victim of a fraud. I have gone through this mayor's office, the last mayor, the county prosecutor. I've reached out to the media. I've had people put me in contact with the journalist community. Nobody is even responding. So when I look at this issue and I say to myself, how can I even get the democracy to function, let alone yield some type of liberation? And so, and when I say to you, I've been in this struggle, this is the 8th year. And I have had my mind spun around in space because I've reached out to all the places that should be responsible for at least addressing this issue. We have a mayor who simply refuses to respond. The communication that I sent to the mayor when he didn't respond, and I wrote to him as candidate and mayor, I sent that communication to the entirety of the Cleveland City Council. I am still not getting any feedback. I have reached out to the media. I was placed in touch with Rachel Dazelle through the Clevelanders for Public Transit. I've reached out to Ms. Mills myself when they appeared on the City Club of Cleveland. So I am saying this is not only an allegation, but I can prove it. I have the evidence, and I just cannot get anybody to respond. And so I say to you in your collective, especially you, Mr. Coswell, in terms of being adjacent to journalism and being in that community, if we don't have a journalistic community that helps us to hold to account the governance structure, it doesn't matter whether you know how the system works. The system is not working, and when I have tried to flag it and say, there's an expose that needs to be done, I'm being crushed. I'm being crushed here, and no one is responding. It would be different if they would contact me and say, well, Ms. Cummings, we've read, we've heard what you've said, we've looked at the evidence. They're not even responding. And so I'm saying there's a real problem here. And I don't think we will find a type of liberation through a democracy that is so broken and where there is no accountability.
Thank you for sharing that. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And one of the things that I hear folks say that journalism has changed a lot through the few years. I have said that even up here. But the piece that I don't feel like should be missed is the way that journalism has never served large portions of this city or other cities. The way that journalism as a system is quite honestly designed to be extractive, designed not to help communities. It's designed to get those stories so you could sell those papers and sell those ads and make money. So I think that doesn't make me feel like that it's not that change isn't possible, but I don't feel like change is possible if we don't actually sit down and understand how that system works, if we don't think about that as a systemic issue, as part of the oppressive systems and part of the systems that are wrong in government. And I would love to sit here and say that I'm hoping that Signal Cleveland will be different than that. I do hope that we'll be different than that, but it doesn't make sense to me to make that promise to you when I'm not capable of sitting here doing anything. It's what I hope for Signal Cleveland. Folks often talk about filling the gaps that have created in news, but I really feel like, like thinking about filling a gap is like a crack on a wall. Like, yeah, you can fill that with spackle or backfill, but A, it's not a gap, it's a chasm, and B, where we are with the way that we want government to work, we could fill that gap with some caulk, or we could actually build something in that space that actually meets the functions of what we want. And I feel like we have every opportunity to do that. I believe that Signal is trying to do that, but that's beside the point. I feel like there's every opportunity to try to recreate the systems to meet the functions that we actually need. But I think we're going to have to figure out a way to do that collectively and collaboratively. I don't have a direct answer for you. I would love to hear more about what your situation is, but I feel like it's possible. I feel like I'm in a spot where I can see and imagine a different kind of new system working to not be extractive, but working in collaboration with people to strengthen democracy, which I don't feel like is the system that we have now. And to some extent with news, never the system that we had.
The only thing I would add, obviously without having the specifics, thank you for sharing. This is why I think there's such power in organizing, because the collective, right, and the ability of the collective to impact change. I would argue that we have not yet seen a democracy in this country, right? That it in itself was an experiment for which I and you did not count, right, as Black women in this country. And so we've been experimenting for centuries now. And the ways in which the system continues to reimagine itself in its destructive ways is really a horrific act that we have to live through every single day. So I just want to thank you. I want to affirm you that I see you and I appreciate you, and that we are actively figuring out. I also, if I had the answer, we would be on somebody's island right now, just sipping Mai Tais, right? That's what I would want to do, is invite all the dope people to the island, right? But we are pushing through this experiment, and we are prototyping ourselves and trying to figure out how can we actually move toward this liberated state that some people, sort of constructed in their mind, was possible. But I don't think we've yet achieved, what on paper the definition of democracy is. So thank you.
Rita, Miss Rita, did you want to go, or did you?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
This is just a quick one. In regards to voting, and the community used to know how to understand the voting in regards to local occurrences. And that's when we all had newspapers that fulfilled the community. you might say that's part of the segregation situation, but from the 1900s all the way to nowadays. And everyone believed in politics is local because it all starts from there. I was making a suggestion that within the whole realm of voting or teaching voting, since they do not teach civics in school like I learned, because I knew how the whole operation works, which is an operation government-wise, that should be taught. It's not taught now, and that's why you have a great many people that don't know or understand that politics is local and that voting in the midterms is the best thing to do first and foremost. So I was thinking about maybe teaching within the confines of the newspapers, which I'm really grateful that we're having the different documenters, because newspaper as we know it has changed since they changed the FCC, which was starting after Martin Luther King, when they made it so that newspapers could own radio stations and TV stations and vice versa. That was a law that was stated so that you didn't have a monopoly on news, which we have gone to communism, which people don't seem to see. But people need to be taught so they can understand that when you need to vote in midterms, this is the reason why. There are meetings that are held, yes, that's true, but as you notice, you can also change them, make them change the times that they have meetings. They have meetings in the afternoon when most people are working. So that's the reason why a lot of people do not come or don't know anything about it. Yes, it's on YouTube, you can get it there, but there's also a great many people in this society that cannot contact anything on anything via the internet. There's still a large gap. So that was my suggestion in regards to that, because people, they need to be taught of how voting works. Will it work? I'm still pessimistic, I'm sorry. My optimism flew out the window a year ago. But because putting Band-Aids on everything and saying we're doing this, it only takes that whole cycle, and that cycle has been going on, as I keep repeating. It's been going on for the last 400 years. It's the same thing, they just repackage it. Yeah. I'm sorry to say, and I might go to jail, but things need to be burned, buried, and started from the very beginning.
I don't see any officers in here, so I think you're safe, Miss Rita. Can I?
I like the documentary thing. That's one of the things. I'm a precinct person. I'm also a peace activist. I'm 76 years old, and was a member of Women Speak Out for Peace. I took neighborhood leadership and neighborhood.
Can you maybe step closer to
Okay.
the mic? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, I said I'm 76 years old. I'm a precinct person. This is my second term now. I'm on the executive committee that selects who's going to be on the slate. So I want to do that, so that's an honor for me to do that this term. But one of the things I say to the people is that, just like I want to piggyback on what she said, one of the problems is that most of these meetings are during the day or late afternoon. And a lot of times we don't know which meetings we can go to. And many times what I've said in our ward meetings, in our community meetings, we're tired of hearing something after the fact. When they bring it to us, they've already signed the contract, the ink is getting ready to dry, and when they come into our community and say they want community input, and I was an engineering major, and I said, well, what's the difference? This has a light green facade, this has an evergreen facade. Which one do you select? That was our neighborhood input. And then when they said we had 200 and something people respond, then you say most of the people did not live in Ward 7 that responded. So, you know, things that are affecting your wards are affected by other things. And so I try to explain to them, you can go down to City Hall when these people come down to City Hall to pitch their thing, to hear what they have to say. You may not be able to say anything at the meeting, but I like to hear from the horse's mouth, not the behind, and not when they get ready to shovel it up. You know, so I appreciate documenters because documenters are talking in practical layman's terms that you can comprehend, because they throw out words and phrases and stuff you don't understand, but you can look it up afterwards while you're writing the information down. And so very few meetings are in the evening. Some of the county meetings you can go to. But what I want to ask you, could you give us your website, because you said you list a group of the meetings that we're allowed to go to. And this is what I was talking to our work club. What we need to do is the people, like, I'm not working, I'm 76 years old. People who can go to some of these meetings, or even go when somebody has a trial, makes it different when the judges look out and see people in the audience. We need to have a bigger presence at those who can go need to go. And the documents are writing something in layman's term. One problem, like I said, I'm 70 years old. We used to have 3 newspapers, and the news reporter has different slants. And one good paper I found is The Scene, because they have a different slant. You know, oh, I didn't think about it, or didn't they bring a lot of things about you don't read in the regular paper. And far as voting is concerned, like the ACLU, we found out about, people that can vote, that if they're in jail and haven't been charged, they can vote. So what I try to tell people in Ward 7, which is Huff, and it comes downtown now, we have a lot of people that have returned from jail, and they're not aware that they can vote. So what we need to do is try to get as many people as possible. And then another thing you were saying, we know about the 3 branches, but like I tried to explain to people, and like she was saying, the midterm, if you don't change who's in the House or the Senate, and a lot of the people don't know it's 2 females running for, governor, lieutenant governor. They don't know it's a female running for Secretary of State. They don't know what their job is. I have people come as judges. Most people don't vote down the ballot because they say, I don't know who that is. People vote for familiar names. One Gallagher might be a Republican, one Gallagher might be a Democrat, but you vote for, like, okay, I know that name. You don't hear from these people until it's time to run. So most people do not vote for judges because they say, we don't know nothing about them. I try to explain to them, these people make decisions over your life, whether it's your estate, whether it's about your property, if it's your grandchild locked up in jail, or your son locked in jail that's running your phone bill up, and you got to put money on the books and stuff like that. And they don't realize what the people in the state do to make, legislative rules. They don't comprehend that at all, So, and then, like when you're talking about City Hall, $100 a year, I could pay that, but it's like $28 a eat, $38 a eat and stuff. So a lot of times when they have those people that's speaking about pertinent things, you can't afford to go down there to listen to what they have to say, to what they have to give you. So some things are designed on purpose. Yeah. And so what I was trying to encourage people to do, those who can go down to those meetings, even though you can't say anything and put your input, you need to hear from the horse's mouth what's going on prior to them already making a deal with your councilman to come through gentrification.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you give the website for?
The website is documenters.org. That's where you'll find the most comprehensive listing of meetings, local government meetings in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. Just click the meetings tab at documenters.org and make sure at the top you have Cleveland, because there are about 6 different cities where the information is listed. But the website itself is documenters.org. All of our documenters reporting is also on that website. Our live tweets and meeting notes, you can find all of that at on the news tab at documenters.org. And also we, part of Documenters' work is taking these meetings and making them more accessible. We are trying to, and creating ways to make the notes and live tweets themselves more accessible. So for a while, we have published in the Cleveland Observer a weekly public meetings report, which summarizes and in even more like sort of basic and accessible language every single meeting that happens every week. That's now a newsletter, which you can sign up for if you go to signalcleveland.org and click the sign up for the mailing list. That'll be available on our website. We're all trying to figure out how to take the work that Documenters are doing and make it even that much more accessible to folks who can't be at these meetings at 1 and 2 in the afternoon or 9 a.m. and whatnot.
And we'll also work to make sure that we have like a resources tab available on our website from Think Tank so that folks can go to it. Yes, young brother.
And I'm part of Uninvited Cleveland. It's about Uninvited Cleveland. It's about all the house got lead poisoning, kids been dying for all there. Cause we getting prayer for everybody out here. We getting water filters out here too.
Thank you.
I feel blessed.
Amen.
Yeah. Yes, my name is Mississippi Charles Bevel. I'm an activist, and I'm 84 years old, and I have a question only. Does either of you know of a particular book, pamphlet, or some legal exposition that clearly details this, how vulgar is the concept to citizenship, that if a citizen has gone to jail for committing a crime or being accused of a crime and do their time, they come out and have to do all the things that a citizen has to do, paying taxes and whatever, but that most important thing to us as citizens, our vote, is taken away. Is there a book, exposition, or pamphlet that you know of that's immediately available in common language explaining that vulgarity?
So the laws do look different state to state. I am not aware of a book that's all encompassing for the United States. Here in Ohio, through our Secretary of State, there is information on their website, Restore the Right to Vote for Returning Citizens, which gives the specifics as it relates to, whether you are in state prison, federal prison, and or local county jail, like what you can and cannot do. And that's also inclusive of halfway houses and community-based correctional facilities. Nationally, I would say one amazing advocate is a gentleman by the name of Desmond Meade. If folks remember, a couple years ago, there was an effort in Florida to make voting rights accessible for those that were impacted, as a result of their prior conviction. He, and not just him as an individual, but him among many people in Florida were pivotal in making that come to fruition. And then ACLU also, both national and the Ohio ACLU, on their website, they have a drop-down menu under their voting rights tab that, again, also details specifically for people who have a prior conviction what you can and cannot do. But the short answer, I can just give it to you right now, which is if you have served time in federal or state prison, well, let me go to state. If you have served time in the state of Ohio in a state facility, once you return home, all you have to do is re-register. You can still be on parole. All you have to do is re-register. If you are at, I'll use our county as an example, Cuyahoga County Jail, awaiting your sentence, you can both register and cast your ballot absentee from jail. Now, there's a challenge because, as I was saying to the young lady before about sort of codifying practices within CMSD, it's not codified into law. So organizations, Susan is still here, from Northeast Ohio Voter Advocates as an example, a lot of the ways that they've been able to access men and women in the county jail is through relationships. If that person leaves, then they have to start the process all over again, which is very laborious. I don't know the exact specific section of the Ohio Constitution, but I know there was and still continues to be efforts to try to make our county jails polling locations. As an example, Cook County in Illinois, their jail is also a polling location. So their board of election or whatever it's called in Illinois comes in and individuals are waiting who are waiting their sentence or trial, are able to vote. So those are just a few resources. But again, just understanding that it is different state by state.
All right, thank you.
Well, thanks for the organizers and those behind the scenes that make this kind of space possible for us to step back and breathe together about these things. I have a question and then a little bit of musing about it, but as a stepping stone for hopefully hearing from you and anyone else. So I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that in the 2020 election, Cleveland's voting rate went down when, the way I heard it, all the other Rust Belt cities had their voting rate go up. If that's true, you're shaking your head yes. Why? Now, a little musing, as I said. Thank you for pointing out how voting is just one piece of democratization. I wonder what's going on with democratization in Cleveland, if that's related to this trend. And as I hear myself ask that question, part of my musing is wondering about the sort of democratization is not just government interactions, of course, what happens in our workplaces, our educational experience, all those aspects of our lives, not just civic life. But in particular, thinking about my experiences with civic interactions and governmental interactions in this city, so much of it seems to come down to what I'm going to call a kind of a paternalism within the wards. To get something done, you got to be on good terms with your ward council president, council rep. That just strikes me as kind of medieval and feudal kind of a system for war. You get the idea? Yes. Compared to like the idea that maybe council officials are elected to do other things like checks and balances in a governmental system, not just be the apparatus for cranking out favors to get reelected. So anyway, those are just some musings, but I wonder what's going on and if anybody else knows about what's going on in other Rust Belt cities such that voting rate goes up, not just that voting is the only piece on things. Any musings?
Yeah. So what you stated is true. Cleveland, so voter turnout, was high across the country in 2020. It was high across the state of Ohio, and compared to our, counterparts across the state, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo, Dayton, we did have the lowest voter turnout. And so I'm going to frame my response in this way. I am a nonpartisan organization, and I have limitations on what I can and cannot say with my professional hat on. But I will, to the best of my ability, try to exemplify that there are many pieces of the puzzle. Nonpartisan engagement is one piece. There's C4s who do, active campaigning, issue-based, which we can do as well. And then there are the partisan, the parties, right? Democrat, Republican, Independent, and so forth. In the state of Ohio, when you think about where investments are going to, we're getting the least amount, nonpartisan organizations. But yet, I believe organizations like ours and dozens of others in the community are the most proximate and close to the people that should be more actively engaged. So that is actually what led us to do this study in 2021, because we were like, yeesh, right? Like, it's just not looking good for Cleveland. And so I'm happy, as Dr. Hardaway say, that she'll have this resource tab to share that research, because we only have so much time. I can't get into all the specifics, but I think you would find it pretty illuminating. And I think Lawrence and I have sort of alluded to some of the findings from that. But I go back to an earlier statement. One of the headlines from that study is that Clevelanders, so the motivation behind the study was not just looking at why the turnout was so low in fall of 2020, but also just to get a general sense of like civic motivation or lack thereof, civic behavior, lack thereof. Like, we were just trying to understand where people are at. And essentially people were like, for far too long, we have felt like we're being treated like a transaction, right? And I'm not sure if she's still here. One of the, yes, she is here. Individuals had commented a few moments ago about not just showing up in my neighborhood, 2 weeks before the election or a month before the election, right? Like, these things have been happening for decades, for hundreds of years, and we think that there's not going to be collateral damage as a result of that. I'm actively learning, right? I'm not an expert in this, so I can't say with specificity exactly like why is that such a prevalent challenge for Cleveland, but I think it goes deeper, well beyond the voting, right? I think all the examples that we've talked about tonight, all the comments and questions that have come through collectively speak to why we have the current pulse of disconnect and disengagement. It's not because people lack knowledge. It's not that we don't have an intelligent electorate in the city of Cleveland, but the forces and the systems that should be promoting and exemplifying and celebrating the people, by the people, for the people, are suppressing it, right? And so people are intelligent, right? And I think we really undermine the level of depth of people's knowledge, and they see that. So we have a lot of work to do. We, meaning like not us, Cleveland Votes, not documenters, but like the collective we have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust and regain trust of members of our community.
We have one more comment question, I think. I'm going to implore you, my friend. You. Thank you. To be appropriate and kind to your fellow colleagues. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hey.
Okay, let me see if I can organize this, because I did have a question, but also a comment. I found out that the last mayoral election, where Justin Bibb was just elected, like a good majority of Cleveland didn't even turn out to vote for either candidate. And I was one of those people, and proudly, because I feel like as minorities, for us to advocate for voting, despite its inability to address our daily needs, is almost like racist at this point. I think to advocate for voting is racist, because it's like the conventional process has brought us this outcome. Martin Luther King, all the people that ever advocated for conventional politics, most of them either were not successful in humanitarian efforts or assassinated. My friend up here can affirm that. What's his name? Sir? Mark? Okay, so I feel like at this point in this modern society, for people to advocate for voting is almost like so racially. That's why I feel like majority of us didn't turn out to vote. And that's why I didn't turn out to vote, because I have enough awareness and enough of an intuition that I don't want to be responsible for the policies that harm black people, because I'm certain that's what's going to happen as a result of me voting. Even if I don't vote, I can assume that the governmental policy is going to victimize some black people, maybe somebody I know, maybe even me. So I'm at this point, I'm wise enough morally to exempt myself from even polluting my hands or my day with voting. And the question I had was, what is a Uncle Tom to you, and do you ever feel like you are one? To have to change your attire and language, and even the institutions, our credibility is all rooted in like institutions. Do you feel like an Uncle Tom sometimes?
Not at all.
Not even a little bit.
So I thank everybody who stayed with us this evening. You have your programs of what is in store for tomorrow. We'll do community safety, we'll do health, we'll do education, and we'll have art, painting, liberation, having an expression of what liberation looks like to us in the city of Cleveland, as well as the meditation, the healing, and the song. So thank you all. We're extremely grateful for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.